Hey, coming up on the show today, we're going to get into the NBA playoffs. We're going to talk about the game last night. We're going to talk about Cleveland and Boston coming up tonight. The Bulls pulled a move in the draft combine. I want to talk to you guys about that. And I'm bringing on my guest, Mike Taglier from Fantasy Pros. So he'll be here to answer questions coming up on Final Seconds.
Get it, ball hard, drop 30. Yeah, touchdown and field goals. Make the game worthy, shoot your lights out, Steph Curry. Final seconds, unfiltered lines blurry. Sports talk radio with the host, Jeff. Black and white stats on the boards, no refs. We all ball, all net field goals. Number 1 seconds of the game, home run. Yeah, let's talk facts over fiction. Seasonal predictions, pay attention, listen. Great debate, all net field goals. Number 1 seconds of the game, home run. Yeah, let's talk facts over fiction. Seasonal predictions, pay attention, listen. Great debate, seem to last forever. All stars, Hall of Fame. It's a new era. Knock it out the park, hear the truth. Through the hoops, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Babe Ruth. Great players, it's the topic. I be on the profit. The contract is king, boy, stop it. Faster than speed of light, 100-yard dash. Check the scoreboard, it's moving too fast. Slow it down, we give the best insights. If you really want what happened in the game last night, tune in. We heads up, always keep it realer. This is Talk Radio, Unfiltered. We unfiltered. Talk Radio, Unfiltered.
What's up, everybody? Hey, welcome into the show. Welcome to Final Second Sports Unfiltered on Intellectual Radio, iHeartRadio. Man, we got a big show for y'all today. I'm bringing in my guest via phone. His name is Mike Taglier. He's from Fantasy Pros. He's a fantasy expert. Check this guy out on Twitter. Everything that has to do, man, he has some good stuff, some good information out there for you guys. But we're going to pick his brain a little bit about some basketball. I know he's a football guy. So, Mike, I'm going to bring you on in. Go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody.
No, what's going on, Jeff? I'm just happy to be on the show with you today. Obviously, it's kind of interesting how we met and everything, but I'm excited to talk some sports. And as for the other sports outside of football, man, it's been a while since I talked about those. I grew up liking baseball and basketball as my favorite sports, and as I gotten older, it's like I go more towards golf and football. So it's just a complete 180 in terms of what I've turned to, but I still pay attention to all the other sports.
Okay, well, I'm not gonna get too in depth on you. I'm gonna make sure we can have some great conversations on it. But before we get into everything that you do, we're gonna cover a little bit of NBA, and because I know everybody's talking about the NBA and the playoffs right now. A lot of everybody want to have some input on that. So what I want to we're gonna jump straight into this Rockets and Golden State game. Now, I know a lot of people have been down on Houston. They pretty much thought it was going to be a gentleman's sweep. They were saying 5-1 at the most. Golden State was just going to run away with it. And then last night, we had such an awesome game with Houston coming back from down 12 points in the fourth quarter to come back and win that game. Now, I told a lot of people last week that the key to Houston beating Golden State is letting Chris Paul run the offense. Because when James Harden runs it, as good as he is, sometimes the other players don't get involved. So that's why I think you could see even from last night when James Harden took it upon himself to let Chris Paul do more. And everybody else started to get involved in that game, and that's what helped them come back. I don't know how much you've been following that series, but what's your take on what's going on in the NBA playoffs right now?
Well, the NBA playoffs are interesting. A lot of people, they become, playoff basketball fans, and that's kind of like where I'm at. I'll catch a game throughout the regular season, and then I'll try and watch some of the postseason. So, of course, I'm going to try and watch LeBron as much as I can. Because, when you're witnessing greatness, you watch it, no matter how you feel about what it is you feel about, which is a question I actually wanted to ask you being on your show. I'll get to in a second. But as for, Chris Paul touching the ball, I agree with you 100%. James Harden can be a little selfish at times. But at the same time, like, he's a playmaker, right? You want the ball in his hands as much as possible because he's a scorer and he's not doing much for you on the defensive side of the ball. But it's been fun, man, and I think it's good for the game of NBA for this series to be as close as it is because, you know, the Warriors, they assembled what you'd call the dream team, kind of like what Miami did a couple of years back, and I just don't think that that's very good for the sport, where there's one or two teams that you just know are going to be in the finals every single year. So it's good to see the Rockets, you know, play as a team and make it as far as they have. But as for the question I had for you, though, you know, so you're from Chicago like me, okay? So I grew up, my age that I'm at, I grew up watching Michael Jordan, and it was during my prime of my, you know, teenage years where I got to see him play. So going to LeBron, you know, this whole conversation of MJ or LeBron, who's the best of all time, I think we should be able to appreciate them in their own way, and which really sucks because there's so many people saying that if LeBron wins another championship here, that he's the best of all time, that he's already the best of all time. But here's the thing is, like, I want to root for LeBron because I think he's a genuinely good human being. And I love the fact that he went back to Cleveland. He's playing with, you know, he's not surrounded by superstars. But at the same time, I don't want people telling me that he's better than Jordan, because if you actually watch Jordan growing up, and like, I've got to see both these guys quite a bit. Jordan was a killer, man. He was a straight up killer, and like, he had that instinct that literally that not many players have. And LeBron's special in his own way. I think we can appreciate that. But where do you stand? Am I out of my mind? Is it just because I grew up watching Jordan as much as I did? But I just feel like it's not a good comparison because they're different players.
You know, I had a show about this like 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
And this show turned so heated. I mean, we had so many people commenting. I mean, the conversation went on 4 days after. I was still getting comments on my feed about it. Now, my take on this whole thing, like you said, I grew up watching Jordan. I've learned to appreciate everything Jordan has done, what he made it through with Detroit, you know, everything he overcame to get to where he is, to be 6-0 in the finals, all his accolades on top of that. I don't take nothing from LeBron. LeBron is a great player, but LeBron is not the GOAT. He's not the GOAT. And for people to say that he is the GOAT, and if he wins this one championship, it makes him the GOAT, it doesn't. It doesn't. It makes it a little bit more stuff to talk about, but it doesn't make him the GOAT. LeBron, like I said, there are two different types of players. LeBron is kind of like a point guard in a power forward's body, where he gets everybody involved. He gets the team going. But just like I put it to people like this: if you had 2 seconds left on the clock and you're down by 1, who would you rather take that shot? And I have had people from that say LeBron is the GOAT would turn around and say, "Oh, I want Jordan to take the shot." Okay, how is LeBron the GOAT if you want Jordan to take the shot?
Even though, I mean, to be fair, LeBron the thing is, he's become a bit more clutch as he's gone further into his career, and he's relied more on his jump shot than he ever has. And that's the thing, is like, that's where I feel like people misconstrue what I'm saying, is that LeBron is a great player. He's one of the greats of all time. But I just felt like comparing the two just wasn't fair. I mean, like, unless you were there, unless you witnessed what Jordan did for the game of basketball, it was just pure domination. Like, when he wanted to win a game, it's over.
Yeah, and that's true. It's hard to compare them. By the way, you listen to Final Second Sports Unfiltered on Intellectual Radio, iHeartRadio. Again, man, if you have any questions, you could call in at 708-223-8953. I got Mike Taglier on the line from Fantasy Pros, and he's talking a little basketball with me right now. And just to jump back into this whole series, like, just to say a little about the Rockets and Golden State again, the Rockets, now, if they would have lost last night, I had said to myself, it's over. And I want the Rockets to win, because I hate, like, Golden State, they built that team the right way when it comes to all the players they drafted. I hate it when I seen Kevin Durant go join those boys over there. Because they did, for one thing, I felt like you're already at the top. You had a 73-9 team. What do you need with Kevin Durant? And for Kevin Durant, like I said, that year he had Golden State down 3-1, and then he choked and they lost to Golden State. So then you choose to go join them. So I have a huge issue with that. It's like this whole making these super teams in the NBA. It makes, just like, I can see why you only watch it in the postseason, because it makes the regular season boring, because you're sitting up just waiting for the playoffs to start, because you already know who's going to be there, and you have so many of these new guys who watch basketball where they love this. I'm like, what's fun about the whole NBA season being pretty much nothing, and you're just waiting for the playoffs? There's nothing exciting about that. It's hurting basketball. We need more parity in this league, where you don't know who is going to be. Where it's like, man, like you got in hockey, where you got Las Vegas made it to the Stanley Cup Finals. I love surprises like that. And you'll never see that in the NBA, because you already know when the season starts, it's between like 1 to 3 teams that has a chance of making it.
That's exactly the truth. That's the part of basketball that has turned into, and that's the thing, is like, we can go back to the Jordan days and talk about the Pistons, the Bulls always being there in the finals, but it was a different game. And the thing is, NBA is as popular as it's ever been. So I think that there can be good things that have come from all of this controversy. I think that the fact that the NBA is allowing players to their personalities to shine, maybe some not shining as much as others, but bringing attention to the game. I think that they've been smart about that, and I think it's built their brand. But at the same time, trying to figure out like how to make this work so that you don't have those super teams anymore, because it's just it does hurt the game.
So who do you have to finish this series? The Rockets or Golden State? Who are you pulling for?
I'm pulling for the Rockets. I would still say that Golden State is probably the better team in the end. I think that Steph Curry coming back and, getting back in the groove of things, it's just taken a little bit longer. I know he's played well in the last few nights, so you can't really take anything away from him. But I think Golden State wins. I think the Cavs end up pulling it out and in the finals. I mean, that's where I tell you I'm torn. Is I want to root for LeBron, because he's such a phenomenal player, and I think he's earned it with what he's done for that team. But at the same time, I still think the Warriors are the ones that are going to pull it out.
Mike, it's funny that you say that, because I face the same thing when it comes to LeBron. It's like I want to see him get there, but I don't want the fans of him to be able to throw it in my face and try to say he's better than Jordan, because he did. So
yes, exactly. Yep.
I'm torn on that same exact thing. So it's because of the fans. I'm like, well, I don't want to see him do it then, which is crazy. But man, like, LeBron is great basketball player, great person, great everything. I mean, the way he presents himself, represents himself, what he do for the community, everything about that with LeBron is great. And a lot of people try to say, oh, Jordan never did anything for the community or whatever. And, you can have some gripes with Jordan about that. But we're not talking about the off the court stuff. When we talk about who's the best, we're talking about strictly between the two on the basketball court. Who do you prefer more? Everybody's going to always have their difference on it, but it is what it is. But it takes me right into the Cavaliers and the Celtics. Now, we all know the Celtics from the beginning of the playoffs. They can't win on the road. They're undefeated at home, but they can't win on the road. Now, everybody, they've been jumping on this whole thing like, man, look at what LeBron's doing. He brought them back and he's tied at 2-2. I knew he was going to bring it back and tie it 2-2, because the Celtics can't win on the road. So I can't, what? Playoffs is the playoffs, but people try to make more out of this whole thing. You have to still remember the Celtics are missing their 2 main players. So a lot of people, they love to jump on this thing, talk about what LeBron is doing, but it's not that hard of what he's going up against right now. Am I being kind of short-sighted with this whole thing? Because I am from the era of Jordan.
I don't necessarily think you're being short-sighted. I mean, there's so many people that are going to, I've seen in the past few weeks, I've seen people posting things about how, everybody talks about how Jordan played in a tougher era, and then they post these videos with a bunch of just tall, lanky white guys, and they think that's the definition of kind of what happened. this is a newsflash for everyone. Anyone who, no matter what your sport is, like me, I just covered the NFL draft a lot, right? And if somebody watches a player's highlight reel, their opinion on that player is going to be different than mine because I've watched film and I see all their lows as well as all of their highs. Were there some joke type players in the NBA when Jordan played? Absolutely. If the competition is good, I mean, I think when you see LeBron go up against the teams like the Warriors, like you're probably going to see in the finals, or even, like I think it's the Warriors. I'm going to say them. When you see him go against teams like that, I think he's going to have issues getting over that hump just because of the talent they have on the other side of the ball. Whereas Jordan coming over the Karl Malones, the Stocktons, like that's basically the teams that he would run up against in the finals. And when Jordan got to the finals, it was the end. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to take anything away from LeBron because, like I said, I'm not a LeBron hater. I'm really not. And I think that the guy, and if, you mentioned it, we're not talking about off-the-court stuff. And if we were, LeBron James is the better human being because, like, as I grew up and I found out more about, the person that Michael Jordan was, it kind of let me down because I grew up idolizing that guy. But LeBron he's just a good guy. And that's the thing is, like, I think he made a mistake by going to Miami, but whatever. He got some championships out of it. But at the same time, I don't know. I don't think you're wrong in your assessment of the Celtics and what he's doing against them. But of course, people are going to use that in argument of why he's the greatest of all time.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm looking forward to see what happens. I think LeBron and Cleveland's gonna close this thing out in 6. But we'll see what happens. That's if they win tonight. I think they should win tonight, but those young boys, they get energized at home, so you don't know what's going to happen. But just to jump off the whole playoff thing, I want to bring something to your attention. Tell me if you ever even heard of anything like this. Now, you got a player by the name of Chandler Hutchinson. He played for Boise State. He's a 6'7" shooting guard. He was invited to the draft combine. The rumor has it that the Chicago Bulls told him, don't work out for the combine, just go home because they're going to draft him at number 22. So he dropped out of the combine and went home. Now, it made me, I'm like, man, if they telling this kid this, let me see what he's all about. So I had to pull up, all I could pull up on him is highlights. I don't have everything on him. But he looks good. He really looks good. But have you ever heard of anything in any sports of like things like that going on behind the scenes just to give yourself an advantage? Because you would think to the NBA that would be something for a team to get fined for.
Well, it's weird. It's a weird situation. And I did hear about this, but I didn't know too much about the player either. There's nothing like this that happens in the NFL in terms of telling a player not to work out the combine. Nothing like that's going to happen. They do have their private workouts that players have started to turn down. They say that they don't want to because the weird part about the NFL and the NBA, it seems like people are convinced of where this kid's going to go in the draft. Now, the Bulls, they're picking. Did you say 23rd?
Well, they got the 7th pick and they got the 22nd pick.
So they're the 22nd pick in the draft. So how could they be even guaranteed that he's going to be on the board? So I understand why if they tell him that, we're going to pick you at 22, so don't work out at the combine. Well, what if someone falls in the draft that the Bulls could like more? Like, I mean, I don't understand all this, but I don't even know how the Bulls can say, we're going to take you at 22 because, well, if you're there, we're taking you. Who's to say that another team wouldn't jump in front of the Bulls or he could move his draft stock up if he performs well at the combine?
Exactly. And that's the biggest question. They said, why wouldn't he work out and improve his draft stock so that he can get drafted higher? But the Bulls are pretty much, like I said, it's a rumor as well was reported, but you would think he would want to work out so he could improve his draft stock. The higher you get drafted, the more you get paid. So, but he was projected to go like top of the 2nd round. So the Bulls telling them like, oh, we'll take you in the 1st round I guess they're pretty much figuring that if he works out, it's going to turn more teams on to him, and then it's going to lessen their chance of being able to get him.
I see what the Bulls are trying to do. I really do, and if that's who they want, that's fine. But the fact that this leaked out, like, I don't think it's good for the Bulls at all. And honestly, I don't know if the NBA, the rules are the same way as the NFL, where it's like, can you bring in a player on a private workout? And, what's to stop this kid from going to visit with these other teams, then working him out and being like, no wonder why the Bulls didn't want you to go to the combine. No, they didn't want anybody else to see you. So, I mean, if this kid, the thing is, I think about it if it was me in the situation, if I'm the prospect, right? And the Bulls tell me they're going to draft me, I'm like, I appreciate that. The only thing that would stop me from working out is because I'm concerned about injury. But if I have confidence in my ability and I know that I should go high in the draft, that I should be a first-round pick, I want to do everything in my power to do that. And I tell the Bulls, I'd say, hey, look, I really do appreciate that. And I hope, I hope this marriage works if you guys do get me at 22. But I feel like it's my responsibility to myself to go to the combine, work out, and kind of see what happens.
Yeah, I just thought that was kind of strange. If he turns out to be as good as they think he's going to be and they pull that off so that they can make sure he's there, hey, kudos to them for doing it. But I just never have heard of anybody doing that type of thing before. So it made me, like, once I watched some tape on it, it made me hope that he's there at 22 for them to pick him. So we'll see what happens with that. That was just kind of interesting to me to see that. But we're gonna jump off into fantasy, and I know it's a little early for fantasy, but I think it's a lot of good information that you can offer people. Because a lot of people make mistakes when it comes to their fantasy drafts. They take certain people higher than they should be taken. They're so anxious. They go into the draft and they're just thinking of one person. I want him, and they end up overvaluing, the position. So a couple questions. I was reading your article that you had this morning about it said strength of schedule QBs. And it's something that I never thought about, even looking into when it comes to fantasy. Could you explain to everybody what you kind of mean about the strength of schedule QBs and how do you use that?
Yeah, absolutely. So strength of schedule, what it does is most people, I'm going to describe two different scenarios because there's two different ways to look at strength of schedule, my way and then the traditional way. The traditional way is you look at the player's schedule because we know which NFL teams are going to play which teams in 2018 now. The schedule has come out. So what people do is they go and they look at last year's stats and they say, how good or bad is the schedule for these positions, right? So if a quarterback is going to go against, 5 top 10 teams, in 2018 that were really good in 2017, will that negatively affect him? That's the normal way to look at it. I went through and I look at it in a different sort of way where it's like, if a defense has one of their star players out, like if the Bears were to lose Brian Urlacher, if the Panthers were to lose Luke Kuechly, the middle linebacker, it's going to affect their defense. So, if they allow one massive game, it shouldn't count negatively over their season total. It's one bad game. So I look at it more of a consistency standpoint of defenses last year, and then I relate that to their schedule in 2018, and I kind of come up with a grade in terms of, or a score, I should say, and how I expect their schedule to be in 2018. Now, there's so many changing factors in the NFL when it comes down to draft picks, who the team acquired in free agency, where it can really change the team's outlook year over year. So you're never going to perfectly get this like nailed down to a T, but at least it's giving us an idea. Okay, well, based on last year, how these teams performed, it seems like this player has a worse schedule than the rest of them. So I know everybody's done it where it's like if you're in your fantasy football draft and you're staring at two players and you're like so torn, you're like, oh, I don't know who to take here. Look at the strength of schedule, have it be the tiebreaker. Go with the guy with the easier schedule.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. Again, you listen to Final Second Sports Unfiltered on Intellectual Radio, Heart Radio. And do you use this for other positions also?
Yes, I've already released my running back, tight end, and quarterback ones. My wide receiver one's going to come up, I think, on Friday. I think I'm going to release that one. The wide receiver one is the most important. Like the other positions, you could make arguments about teams changing and this and that. But the reason that people can, consistently predict who the top 10 wide receivers are going to be, we know Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, those guys are going to be at the top of the wide receiver rankings provided they stay healthy at the end of the year. Where nobody understands that cornerbacks are the same way. These are the guys that are covering the wide receivers. We know who the best cornerbacks in the game are, so why can't we find strength of schedule for wide receivers? And this should be extremely accurate. So wide receiver is the one position that I believe is extremely accurate in strength of schedule the way I do it, because I go through and I give them a -5. I'll just give you the outline here. They'll get a -5 in their score for each matchup that they have with a shutdown cornerback. Like the Jaguars last year, A.J. Boye and Jalen Ramsey are just a lights-out duo. You don't want to start wide receivers against them. They get a -5 for that game for the year. You move on to the next one, and they get a grade for every single game in which wide receivers are going to, struggle because of the matchups they have. Tyreek Hill, this is like a sneak peek at my article that'll be coming up on Friday, is that Tyreek Hill has the toughest schedule in the NFL for wide receivers this year. The addition of Sammy Watkins should help because it's going to take some attention away from him. But at the same time, their schedule is brutal. And wide receivers is one that I would definitely check out if you guys play fantasy.
Hey, guys, y'all better pay attention to this information for everybody who love those fantasy leagues, because that makes a lot of sense when you're talking about strength of schedule for wide receivers, when you're picking them, who they're going up against. And man, I really like where this is going, because you're turning me on to something with fantasy that just ways I never looked at it before. So I just thought that was pretty interesting the way that you explained that. I was looking at another way that you look into it, where you call it the BBEIB, boom, bust, everything in between.
Yeah.
And now explain to people what that's all about.
This is going to be like my signature article every year. I did it the first time I did it last year, and it was a big hit on the site, and people wanted to come back, and they were asking a bunch of questions about it, so we're going to kind of expand it in 2018, where what I do is, for those who play fantasy, they know, like, if you go back to 2016, I think Frank Gore finished as the number 12 running back. If you actually played fantasy football in 2016, you know that Frank Gore was not the 12th best running back. Just because at the end of the year that those numbers are where they are, it doesn't mean that he helped you on a week-in, week-out basis. Injuries might have played into it, just the fact that he didn't have any bust games, but he also didn't have any games that would have necessarily won you a matchup. So what I did is the same thing I do with strength of schedule, where I go and I look at that player in terms of how his performances were week to week, and I look at his consistency, where I call it boom, bust, everything in between, because I want to look at what games he boomed, which I consider 25 plus PPR points. That's a big boom for a running back or a wide receiver. Whereas if they bust, it's anything less than 8 PPR points. So you find out that boom, that bust, and then everything in between. How many wide receiver 1 performances? How many wide receiver 2 performances? And how many wide receiver 3? What it does, it allows you to see which players are going to be incredibly inconsistent. Deshaun Jackson has traditionally been a player who's been very boom or bust. T.Y. Hilton, another player, where it's like you never know what you're going to get out of these guys. And because of boom, bust, and everything in between, you can kind of see where the player's arc is and what to expect out of them. So someone like T.Y. Hilton, who might finish the year as a top 12 wide receiver, it doesn't mean you should draft him as a top 12 wide receiver, because he might perform like a wide receiver 1, 20% of the time, but then, 40% of the time he's busting and it's hurting your team. So it's all about consistency and getting as much consistency as you can on your team while getting some of that upside as well.
Yeah, all of that is. Hey guys, if you want to ask Mike any questions, you could call in 708-223-8953, or you could leave comments on the Facebook Live feed, and I'll make sure I mention those questions to him. Another thing I was looking now, the NFL draft, when it comes to new rookies coming in, how do you analyze those players, being new to the NFL? So
is this from like a fantasy perspective, or do you mean from like a whole team perspective?
It's from a fantasy perspective.
So it varies by position, and I will tell people this. People are always, it's kind of like a negative mindset out there with a lot of people. They're like, oh, don't draft rookies. They always disappoint in the first year. That is absolutely not true when it comes to running back. if you have a running back who was drafted in the top 2 rounds of the NFL draft, make no mistake, they are going to get a ton of touches, and you want them in fantasy football. I actually did a study this offseason where I went through and I looked at the last 5 years of rookies who've been drafted, wide receivers, running backs, tight ends. Tight ends are the worst. You don't want to draft rookie tight ends. They almost never perform. Evan Ingram last year was kind of an outlier. Running backs, if you're drafted in the first round, those running backs average on, I think it's 243 touches in their first year. And if you get 243 touches, you're finishing as a top 24 running back, and you're most likely going to finish as a top 12 running back. So guys like Saquon Barkley, I have him as my number 3 running back on the board this year. I'm drafting him. I'm having no hesitations about it. The running backs who were taken in that first round, you had Rashad Penny go to the Seahawks, and you had Sony Michel going to the Patriots. So there's a lot of running. I think it was either 7 or 8 running backs who were taken in the top 2 rounds. And it's because teams are refusing to sign someone like Adrian Peterson. They're refusing to sign someone like DeMarco Murray. These guys are still free agents because it's a young man's game at the position. They want a running back who can come in and carry the ball right away, and they hopefully the running back can catch passes out of the backfield. And that's why you got to love Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, Saquon, I know he's going to be everybody's target come starting, the season for fantasy drafting. But what would you say is the most common mistake that people make going into their fantasy drafts?
The most common mistake that people make is paying for last year's performance. I mentioned Tyreek Hill and the fact that, people look at last year and they see that he finished the top 10 wide receiver. I mean, that's all fine. And, Adam Thielen, he's another one, finished top 10. So people are drafting these guys as top 12 wide receivers in 2018. The issue is that the efficiency was off the charts for Tyreek Hill in 2017. Like, it's unsustainable in reality. I know that some people are excited about Patrick Mahomes and that he can be a franchise quarterback. But if you look at Alex Smith in 2017, he had an MVP caliber type season. He legitimately did. I would make the argument that Alex Smith deserved consideration for the MVP last year with how he played. So when you put that together with Tyreek Hill, who I think 48% of his yardage in 2017 came on the deep ball, that's unsustainable, and it's just not going to happen. So, especially when they add Sammy Watkins, especially when you figure in the fact that he has a ridiculously hard strength of schedule, all these things come into play, whereas like Tyreek Hill, if you're drafting him as the wide receiver 10, wide receiver 12, you're paying for last year's production. Don't do that. Always look for equity in your pick. So if you're, let's say that someone like Devontae Parker or Jamison Crowder, these guys didn't finish, in the top 30 wide receivers last year. So they're going to fall down draft boards because people want the new shiny toy. What I look for is the players who have the equity. Someone like Devontae Parker, I mentioned him. He's a former first-round wide receiver. He's 6'3", 220 pounds. When he's been healthy and when he sees targets, he produces. The issue is that Jarvis Landry was there, limiting how many targets he could actually get. Jarvis Landry is now with the Cleveland Browns. So, Devontae Parker is going to get those targets this year, and he's someone, when you draft him as the 35th, 40th wide receiver off the board, there's nothing but built-in equity there because he can finish as a top 20 wide receiver if everything comes together. You always want to find those players who have that built-in equity. The only time that you don't really worry about that is in the top 2 rounds. My rule with fantasy football drafting, and seriously, do not look past this. This is probably the most important thing that you can take away from this, is that you cannot win your fantasy football draft in the first 2 rounds. But I can tell you, you can definitely lose it by taking chances. So, don't take players that there's so much risk built in, but you're like, the upside's there. Don't do that. Just go after the players who are safe. Julio Jones, see him fall in drafts. People are falling in love with running backs, and I understand why. But don't let some of these proven studs like A.J. Green, like Mike Evans, don't let them fall down draft boards.
You have really, because I know for a while I had kind of went away from the regular fantasy drafts. I was doing more of the DraftKings and things like that. But you have really opened my eyes to a different way of looking at this thing, because a lot of times I'm at fault for that, because when I go and I do my draft, I'm looking at stats from last year. I'm looking at who had a breakout year, and like you're automatically expecting for that to happen again. besides looking at what they got to face this coming year. So that you definitely showed me a way to look at it that I didn't even think about at first when it comes to fantasy drafts, because you get invited into these drafts and you go beers and you're drinking and you're drafting and pretty much then you don't even know what you're doing while you're drafting.
Yeah, no, well, that's there's some more rules too. Outside of not winning your league in the first round or two, I don't really care how you feel about a defense. I don't care how much you like a kicker. You don't draft them. You take them with your last 2 picks. I don't care what. Like people last year, Denver and the Cardinals, those were teams, and the Giants were one of them, where teams were paying the Seahawks. People were paying 12th, 13th round picks for these defenses, and they were bad. Now, granted, do I think Jacksonville's going to be bad? No, I don't. But at the same time, defense has so much turnover. It's so variable. Do not take a defense or kicker until your last 2 picks if you have to. Another one is that quarterback is as deep as it's ever been. I mean, I've been on record as saying, and this kind of goes to show I'm not a homer, Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback of all time. And I will say it until I'm blue in the face, is that I've watched Tom Brady, I've watched Peyton Manning, and I've seen Aaron Rodgers. He's the best in the game. And it's just hands down. When he's on the field, the man he's just amazing. But with that being said, even though I feel that way about him, I would not draft Aaron Rodgers until the end of the 3rd round, beginning of the 4th round. Why?
Wow.
Because the position is so replaceable. Like, I kid you not, Jeff, there are 22, 23 quarterbacks this year that I would be okay walking in as my starter. Why? Because the thing is, the difference in points between the guy who's the number 8 quarterback and the number 22, it's going to be 1.5 points per game. That's basically what it's going to come down to. Whereas if you take a quarterback, let's say you take a quarterback in the 4th or 5th round, you're passing on a running back who's probably going to finish as a top 24, top 30 guy. Whereas, if you wait and take a running back later in the draft, you're going to grab someone that you're just hoping for injury, because those guys are not going to be guaranteed to perform. And quarterbacks, you can get one that's guaranteed to perform that down there. He may not be as elite as Aaron Rodgers. He may not be as elite as Tom Brady, but you're going to get production out of that position. So don't take a quarterback too early. Understand that there's a lot of guys out there that can produce for you. And again, the defense and kicker, last 2 picks. Like, there is no questions about that. Like, there's no excuse to take a defense or a kicker outside the last 2 rounds.
See, now you just hit me with something else new, because I've always thought that you get your quarterback early. You get that quarterback early. You get that running back that you want. You get him early. And now that you're telling me, you give me a different way to think about it, because like you said, when it comes to the points that they're going to gain for you, the difference in points is not worth using that high of a pick on them. And for you to say how much you love Aaron Rodgers, but you wouldn't take him till, like we said, the 3rd round.
Yeah, the end of the 3rd, beginning of 4th. That's when yeah.
And I know you see people all the time, quarterbacks fly off the board in the 1st and 2nd rounds. Mm-hmm. So that is very interesting. Hey, you listen to Final Second Sports Unfiltered on Intellectual Radio, iHeartRadio. And again, you got any questions, you call at 708-223-8953. I am talking to Mike Taglier from Fantasy Pros. He is a fantasy expert. And now, I know this whole conversation is making me want to get back into, the regular fantasy drafts, and because I had went strictly towards, the DraftKings and things like that. Mm-hmm. But don't you think with DraftKings and FanDuel, doesn't it kind of take away from the regular, fantasy drafts that everybody do? Because now you're talking about changing your team every week, having chances to win big money, and and I know it's almost like winning the lottery. These things could be so hard to win. But do you play the DraftKings and the FanDuels along with the regular fantasy?
I do, yeah. I actually do both, and I can tell you exactly why people are starting to gravitate more towards DFS and less towards season long, and it's because it's instant gratification. You play DraftKings, you play FanDuel, and you find out if you win that day. Like, like you're going to find out if you made some money. You're going to find out if you lost some money. Whereas in season-long leagues, you have to go, the entire season before you find out, did I win my fantasy league? There's wins and losses every week, but just because you lose one week, it doesn't mean you necessarily lost. And honestly, the stakes are so minuscule when you break it out, because let's say that for an average fantasy football league that, from casual fans that I talk to, it's usually about $50 to $100 for that, So if you're playing $50 to $100 over a span of 16 weeks, like you're talking about $8 a week. Whereas like people that are playing DFS, they're putting in, it varies by the level of players. Some people play like $3 tournaments. I know guys that literally play $15,000 a week in DFS because it's their job. And I honestly, it's one of those things that I talked about doing because I feel like I'm good enough at my job to do that for a living. But at the same time, people that do DFS for a living, they grind it out. And the thing is that's their job. Like my job is to write, to inform other people. Like I tell people now, I am a player, or I'm a player second, I'm a writer first. And there has to be a line there. There's some writers that I've met in the industry who will hold back some of their information just because they don't want their league mates to find out. They want to win money in DFS, whatever the case. Me, I've kind of put all that aside, and I said, you know what, my career, what I want to do is I want to write about football. And I always put my work first, and it got me to land my second full-time job in the industry. So I'm grateful, and I still do play DFS. I try and give people as good advice as I possibly can. I promise that I never hold anything back. But yeah, I do both, and the reason that people like DFS is because you get to pick that new team every single week, and you get that instant gratification. Like, I won $200. I can go out and I could buy that jersey I wanted, or I could take my wife out to eat. Something like that, where it's instant.
Hey guys, that's even more reason to give Mike a follow on Twitter, because he's giving it to you like he sees it. He's not holding any information back for his own game. And man, this guy really knows his stuff when it comes to fantasy. And like, man, I just remember back when I first met you, coming to your house, doing my other job, and the conversations we had then, and talking about. I told you I wanted to start this show right here and getting this show started, and definitely appreciating you, keeping your word and coming on. You told me, hey, you get it started, I'll come on your show, I'll do a show with you, and I definitely appreciate you doing that.
No, I appreciate having me on, man. Like, as long as I have time, I want to talk football. Like, seriously, I think it's really cool to see people follow their dreams. I was one of those people. I had a normal desk job. I worked at Chase Bank. I worked, and my career was fantastic. People would have loved to have my job that I had with them. My wife knew I was never happy doing it the way I am now, where it's just like, I grinded, it took me around. Like, I worked multiple jobs for, I think it was 6-7 years before I got my first full-time gig writing. So it takes time, but if you want something, man, you'll get it. That's the bottom line. It's like, seriously, if you want something bad enough, you'll do it. And my dad always told me that growing up, but I never believed it as a kid. I always give him the smart-ass response where I said, I would tell him, I was like, Dad, because I've never been fast. I can't run. I can't run a 4.5 40, nothing like that. But my dad would always tell me, like, do anything you put your mind to. And it was always, I'd always be like, well, Dad, if I wanted to, I couldn't be the fastest, sprinter. And he laughed and he said, if you really wanted to, you'd find a way to do it. And I ended up figuring it all out later in life, unfortunately, after he had passed. But it's a lesson that I'm going to pass on to my little dude, my little daughter. Just follow your dreams. That's ultimately in the end, like, what are we here for, right? Enjoy your life, do the things you love, and chase your dreams.
Very good point. Very good point. Hey, I'm gonna go ahead and let you go, but I want to thank you for joining the show. I want to thank you for all of your input on fantasy football. And man, I know when I get questions feed about fantasy, I'll be pointing people straight to your Twitter handle so they can ask you questions and pick your brain about all the mistakes that they're making in fantasy.
That's what I'm here for. So send them over my way, and I will help them to the best of my ability. And again, I do appreciate you having me on.
All right, Mike. Thank you for taking time out for the show, man. I appreciate you. I'll be talking to you soon.
All right. Take care.
All right. Well, yeah, everybody, that was Mike Taglier from Fantasy Pros. You know, he was nice enough to join us on the show. I hope you got a lot of information. People who love fantasy, I hope you got a lot of information out of that. A lot of do's and don'ts. Who would have knew that you shouldn't even be taking your quarterback to the end of the third, beginning of the fourth round? I never knew that. Everybody wants to try to grab a quarterback or a running back in the first two rounds. And like he said, don't look at what that player did last year. Look at what that player is going up against this year. And that's going to give you a good idea of how he's probably going to score. What type of defenses are he facing? Where if he's a receiver, what type of corners are he going up against? You know, he wrote a lot of good columns about, you know, the quarterback strength of schedule. He's going to do a wide receiver strength of schedule. And it gives you a good idea of where you want to lean, where you want to go when it comes to your fantasy draft and your fantasy picks. But like I said, I know it's a little early for fantasy, but definitely just wanted to dive back in that whole thing. And I wanted to jump back to the NBA real quick, where last night, that game last night, just like I told everybody a week ago, the only way Houston is going to do this thing is if they let Chris Paul be Chris Paul. You can't have Chris Paul standing in the corner waiting on James Harden. That's not the type of player he is. Chris Paul is a get everybody involved, get you easy shots, break a defense down, dish it out. That's what he does. James Harden is a scorer. Let him just be a scorer. James Harden would be even greater if you take the burden off of him to try to get other people involved. Let him do what he does best, which is scoring. And I'm telling you, they'll make it past Golden State if they keep that same thing. Because even when Houston went down last night and they were trailing, it took for Chris Paul to take over and start running the team. That's what brought them back. That's what brought them back. And that's what he's going to have to keep on doing. And I hope James Harden has realized that, to just play off the ball and be a scorer. You know, we'll give you some isolation plays so you can play hero ball and all that. But when it all comes down to it, we need to let Chris Paul do his thing and run this team. Listen to Final Second Sports Unfiltered on Intellectual Radio, iHeartRadio. And, you know, now I'm going to take you into my crazy and insane. Now, I came across this story, and I wish I could have been talking about this story. So some of you might have heard about it, but it's just so good of a crazy and insane, I have to talk about it anyway. Now, this is a story about a woman was accused of serving her lover's remains at a barbecue. So, just to tell you what's going on with this story, I'm going to read to you. It says, an Indiana woman who injected her husband with a lethal dose of heroin before smothering him with a pillow may be responsible for 9 other deaths and is suspected of serving her lover's remains to unsuspecting neighbors at a barbecue. Kelly Cochran, 34 years old, was sentenced to 65 years in prison last month after admitting to killing her husband, Jason Cochran. But she was already serving a life sentence for killing and dismembering another lover, Chris Reagan, who vanished in 2014. An upcoming documentary called Dead North, set to air on May 28th and 29th on Discovery, probes other possible murders that may be linked to Cochran. Cochran family told investigators that she killed as many as 9 people and buried their bodies throughout the Midwest. Her friends and family also told investigators the stomach-churning tale of how Cochran allegedly served Reagan's remains to her neighbors at a barbecue. That's what shows you don't eat other people's food. It says the Iron River police chief who investigated Reagan's disappearance says she met Cochran and her husband during a probe, court documents stated. The investigator learned that Cochran was having an affair with Reagan, but the case went cold until Jason Cochran died in February 2016 of a suspected overdose. Later on, investigators found he was murdered by his wife. Cochran admitted she and her husband lured Reagan inside their home, shot him, dismembered him before dumping his remains in the woods. So their whole agreement said Cochran and her husband made a pact to kill off anyone involved in their extramarital affairs. So he was messing around with her. The husband got jealous. They made the pact to kill him off, but she was mad that they had to kill him. So she wasn't happy about that. So it said, but Cochran said she was angry at her husband and killed him as revenge for murdering Reagan, the court stated. So she's mad at her husband for murdering her lover. But then it says, May 2017 for Reagan's murder and sentenced on April 18th for her husband's slaying. Investigation Discovery said in a statement that Cochran's brother told investigators he feared his sister was a serial killer. And neighbors said they believed they were served human remains at the barbecue. Man, I tell you, it makes you think about back in the day when you go to the block parties and you got everybody bringing food in and you got the guy right in the middle of the block, he's barbecuing, and she walk up and say, hey, I got these meats, throw these on the grill. If you don't ask what's going on or what type of meat that is that she's bringing you, or just say no thank you. Now, you had to know. You live around this woman. You had to know she was a little bit off. So you should have turned down anything she brought to the barbecue from the beginning. You should have said thank you and then tossed it right after she left. So, but man, how crazy is that where if you live in this area and you're reading this story and all this is coming out, and you starting to realize that you may have ate another human's body, that I don't even know if my stomach can get over that. I think I would go straight vegan after that. I wouldn't want nothing else. That's just insane. You got some crazy people out there. Now they serving you humans. Man, I'm telling you, watch who you eat from. Don't let everybody give you food. You can't take everything. You got to turn down some things. But man, it's been a great show. I hope you got a lot out of our guest Mike Taglier with his fantasy input and his expertise on everything. And man, I want to thank you for tuning in. Once again, you were listening to Final Second Sports Unfiltered on Intellectual Radio, iHeartRadio. And man, I'll see you next week.
Let's get it. Ball hard, drop 30. Yeah, touchdown and field goals. Make the game worthy. Shoot your lights out, Steph Curry. Final seconds. Unfiltered lines blurry. Sports talk radio with a host Jeff. Black and white stats on the boards, no refs. We all ball, all net field goals. Number one, final seconds of the game, home run. Yeah, let's talk facts over fiction. Seasonal predictions, pay attention, listen. Break the base in the last forever. All stars, Hall of Fame. This new era, knock it out the park, hear the truth. Through the hoops, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Babe Ruth. Great players is the topic. I be on the profit. The contract is king, boy, stop it. Faster than the speed of light, 100-yard dash. Check the scoreboard, it's moving too fast. Slow it down, we give the best insights. If you really want what happened in the game last night, tune in. We heads up, always keep it realer. This is Talk Radio, Unfiltered. We unfiltered, yeah. Talk Radio.